Commander Elias Hart had traveled across countless star systems, walked on dozens of alien worlds, and faced dangers that would have terrified most humans. Yet nothing in his years of service had prepared him for this moment. The council chamber of the Zephyrian Empire was vast, a dome of shimmering crystal that seemed to hum with energy, reflecting the pale glow of distant stars. Aliens of every shape and form surrounded him, their eyes cold, calculating, and unreadable. Yet in the center of it all stood her, Lyra. Lyra was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. She moved with a grace that seemed effortless, each motion fluid and mesmerizing, her bioluminescent skin shifting in soft, radiant patterns. Her eyes, large glowing pools of silver and violet, studied him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. There was no malice in her gaze, nor curiosity born of fear. It was something else, something raw, almost dangerous in its honesty. The human delegation whispered among themselves, but Elias barely noticed. He felt as if the air itself had changed, as if the entire galaxy had narrowed down to the space between him and her. Then came the question, soft yet firm, cutting through the chamber like a blade. "Human," she said, her voice like a melody that could unbalance the mind. "Why do you find me beautiful?" The question landed with a weight he could almost touch. It was simple yet impossible. Elias opened his mouth, then closed it, unsure where to begin. How could he explain a feeling that had no words? How could he express something so human in a room filled with creatures who had never known such emotions? The council members froze. Even the Zephyrians, masters of logic and reason, seemed uncertain. The silence that followed was deeper than the void outside the dome. It pressed down on him, heavy and suffocating, but Elias felt no fear. Instead, a strange clarity filled him. He stepped forward, letting the quiet settle around him like a protective shield. His voice, when he finally spoke, was steady, but carried a warmth that seemed foreign in the sterile chamber. "Because," he said, looking directly into her eyes, "you remind me that life itself is a miracle, that even in the vast emptiness of space, even among the cold calculations of empires and fleets, there is light. And you carry that light without even knowing it." Lyra tilted her head, studying him as if she were analyzing a complex equation. Her glowing tendrils of hair shifted with her movement, a silent ripple of energy that seemed to echo the words. Elias saw something flicker in her eyes, confusion, curiosity, maybe even something close to wonder. He took a deep breath, letting the words settle, not for the council, not for the Zephyrians, but for her. "You are not just a representative of your people," he continued, "not just a figure of diplomacy. You are alive, and that is what makes you beautiful. Your presence reminds us that life, any life, is precious. That hope exists even when we feel it has been extinguished." The chamber remained silent, but the air felt different now. It was no longer cold or rigid. It hummed with possibility, with the quiet recognition that something extraordinary had been spoken. The Zephyrians, creatures who measured worth in logic and strategy, were beginning to sense it too. A human, frail and mortal, had dared to speak not with strategy but with truth. Lyra's glow shifted subtly, warmth creeping into her bioluminescence as if the words themselves had touched her core. For the first time in her life, she did not hide behind the careful masks of diplomacy. For the first time, she seemed to feel. Elias, sensing the change, allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. In the middle of a galaxy weighed down by politics, war, and fear, he had found a moment of clarity. And in that moment, he realized that what he felt for her, what he saw in her, was more than attraction. It was recognition. The recognition that even in the coldest corners of the galaxy, even in the most distant, unknowable beings, there existed the spark of life, the light that made everything worthwhile. And perhaps, he thought, this spark, this connection, could change the fate of more than just two individuals. The council chamber was silent, but the silence no longer felt heavy. Instead, it vibrated with a tension that was almost alive. Every being in the room sensed that something extraordinary had just happened. The Zephyrians, who prided themselves on logic and reason, were unsettled. They had not seen a human speak like this before, not so openly, so honestly. Elias Hart, a single human among countless aliens, had dared to speak of hope and life in a way that touched something primal in their collective consciousness. Lyra floated closer, her glow softening as she observed him. There was still curiosity in her eyes, but now it was mixed with something deeper, something unfamiliar even to her. A flicker of emotion. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was soft and almost hesitant. "You speak with feelings," she said. "Feelings are weak. They cloud judgment, they lead to mistakes. Why risk them?" Elias looked at her steadily. He could see the question burning behind her words. She did not understand, yet she sought to understand. "Because," he replied, "feelings are not weakness. They are what make us human. They are what give life meaning. Without them, we are just empty shells moving through the galaxy, touching nothing, changing nothing." Lyra's tendrils of light quivered slightly. "But," she said, "if feelings are so important, why do you risk everything, your reputation, your place here, your very life, by speaking them openly before the council?" Elias paused. He had not considered it in those words. Perhaps he had not realized how dangerous it was to speak honestly in such a place, among beings who judged worth only by power and calculation. Yet he could not retract. He could not take back what he felt. "Because silence changes nothing," he said firmly. "It only allows fear and hatred to grow. Words can heal. Words can reach where weapons cannot. If I speak even at the risk of anger or rejection, I give us a chance. Just a small chance to see each other as more than threats or strangers. To see each other as life. As living beings, deserving of respect, deserving of beauty." Lyra tilted her head, processing his words. For a moment her glow dimmed, then brightened again, warmer this time, almost hesitant. Elias noticed how her bioluminescent pattern shifted, as though reflecting the change in her thoughts. He realized she was struggling to reconcile the human concept of emotional honesty with the rigid logic of her people. "You see me," she said quietly, "not as a representative of my empire, not as a being of status or power, but as me?" "Yes," Elias said simply, his voice steady and gentle. "I see you, just you. And that is why you are beautiful, not because of your glow or your grace or your strength, but because you exist, because you are alive in a universe that often forgets what life is worth." For the first time, Lyra allowed herself a full look at him, really looking, not as a diplomat calculating outcomes, but as a being encountering another being for the first time and feeling something new stir inside. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she drifted slightly closer, the glow around her softening, almost trembling. The other council members shifted uneasily. Some whispered among themselves. Some tried to hide their reactions. They had never seen words carry so much weight. They had never seen a human risk everything with honesty, vulnerability, and courage. And Elias, sensing the subtle change in the room, knew that this was only the beginning. He took a slow breath, letting the silence stretch a little longer. He wanted her to understand. Not just hear him, but truly understand. "I am not afraid to speak what I feel," he said softly, "because I know that honesty can do what weapons cannot. It can open minds. It can touch hearts. And perhaps if we allow it, it can change the course of the galaxy itself." Lyra's glow pulsed gently, a sign of thought and emotion, and for the first time, she spoke with genuine curiosity, rather than the cold detachment of a diplomat. "Human, your words? They matter. Why? Why do you believe in something so fragile?" Elias's eyes met hers, unwavering. "Because fragile things survive when steel breaks. Because hope lasts when fear dies. Because life, every life, is worth believing in." And in that moment, the distance between them, the human and the alien, seemed to shrink. In a galaxy defined by war, politics, and fear, Elias Hart had dared to show what it truly meant to be human, To feel, to risk, and to hope. The chamber's silence lingered, thick and tense, but it was no longer just curiosity that filled the space. It was scrutiny. The Zephyrian council members, creatures who valued cold logic above all else, began to stir uneasily. Some leaned forward, whispering in the low hum of their alien voices. Others crossed their limbs, bioluminescent patterns flickering in agitation. Elias' heart felt the pressure, the weight of countless eyes measuring him, testing him, but he did not flinch. One of the elder Zephyrians, larger and more imposing than the others, spoke finally. His voice was a harsh, metallic tone that reverberated across the chamber. "Human," he said, "your words are dangerous. Feelings are weaknesses. They cloud judgment. They make you vulnerable. Why risk exposing yourself so carelessly?" Elias met the elder's gaze, steady and unwavering. He felt no fear, only a deep, unshakable certainty. "Because," he said, his voice echoing softly but clearly, "weakness is only what you call it when you do not understand it. Feelings are not weakness. They are strength. They are what bind us, what drive us, what make life meaningful. Without them, logic alone cannot save us from ourselves or from each other." A murmur passed through the chamber. Some Zephyrians exchanged glances, their glowing eyes wide. Humans were known for courage, yes, but to speak like this, so openly, so defiantly, was unprecedented. Another council member, a smaller, quick-moving alien with crystalline limbs, hissed sharply, "You endanger not just yourself but your entire species. Your words defy reason, threaten our order, and undermine diplomacy." Elias shook his head slowly, his expression calm. "No," he said gently, "I do not threaten diplomacy. I do not defy reason. I speak a truth you have forgotten, that life itself has value, that every being is worth understanding. Words, when spoken honestly, can reach places that fleets and weapons cannot. I speak because silence has led to nothing but fear and hatred for centuries. If I do not speak now, the galaxy will continue down a path that destroys more than it creates." Lyra floated closer, her glow warmer and more fluid, as though reflecting the courage in his heart. "Human," she whispered, "you risk everything for words, for emotion. Why? Why do you hold so tightly to this fragile thing called hope?" Elias's eyes softened as he looked at her. "Because hope is what makes life worth living," he said. "Because hope allows us to see the light even in the darkest places. Because without hope all that remains is emptiness, and I will not allow the galaxy to be empty. I will not allow your life or anyone else's life to be reduced to numbers, strategies, and cold calculations. Life is more than that. You are more than that." For a moment the council fell into silence again. It was different this time. Not the heavy, oppressive quiet of judgment, but a quiet charged with uncertainty. The Zephyrians were not used to words carrying weight like this. A human so small and seemingly fragile had spoken with courage and clarity that cut through centuries of ingrained logic. Lyra's bioluminescent patterns shifted subtly, radiating warmth that had never been allowed in such a formal setting. "And yet," she said softly, "you speak as if you know what you risk. You speak as if your heart is unshakable." Elias smiled faintly. "I do not know the future," he admitted. "I cannot promise safety, victory, or peace. But I do know this. To speak the truth, to see the value in life, and to risk everything for it, that is what makes us human. That is what makes us strong. Not weapons, not fleets, not even empires. Strength comes from the courage to care even when it is dangerous." The room trembled, not physically, but in the hearts of all present. What Elias had said was not just words. It was a declaration, a challenge, a revelation. For the first time, the Zephyrians felt the weight of human courage, raw and unfiltered, and the truth of their own limitations. And in that moment, Elias' heart knew that he had begun something larger than himself, something that might change not just a council chamber but the very course of the galaxy. Lyra floated silently, her bioluminescent glow shifting softly like the light of distant stars. The council chamber had grown quieter, not because the Zephyrians had stopped talking, but because they were listening. Elias Hart's words had unsettled them, challenged them, and something deep inside them stirred. A feeling they had long denied. And Lyra, she felt it most of all. She drifted closer, her large glowing eyes fixed on Elias. "Human," she said quietly, "you speak of life, of hope, of courage, yet you risk everything for a single truth. I do not understand. Why do you value this fragile thing called feeling so much? Why do you risk so much to express it?" Elias met her gaze calmly. His eyes were steady, warm, and unflinching. "Because it is all we truly have," he said. "Weapons can destroy, fleets can conquer, empires can rise and fall. But feelings, connection, hope, those are the things that endure. They survive when everything else fails. They remind us why life matters. They remind us why we fight, why we live, why we dream. And I see that spark in you." Lyra's tendrils of light pulsed gently, her glow softening as she considered his words. She had spent her life following protocols, obeying orders, hiding behind logic and reason. Emotions were unpredictable, dangerous, and inefficient. Yet here was a human, a fragile being compared to her species, speaking with courage, clarity, and unwavering honesty. And somehow, she understood him. "You see me," she whispered almost to herself. "Not as a diplomat, not as a tool of my empire, not as a representative of power, but as me?" Elias nodded, a small, almost imperceptible smile on his lips. "Yes, as you. Not for your position or your authority, not for your abilities or your glow. I see you because you are alive, because you exist, because in this vast galaxy among all the chaos you shine, and that is beauty." Lyra's glow shifted again, warmer this time, a soft ripple flowing through her body like liquid light. She floated closer, and for the first time there was no caution in her movement, no calculated restraint, only curiosity and a quiet willingness to feel. "You speak as if feelings are weapons," she said softly. "Yet they can hurt. They can make one vulnerable." Elias's gaze did not waver. "Yes," he admitted. "They can. But they can also heal. They can inspire. They can connect worlds and people and even species. The choice is ours, whether to hide behind fear and logic or to embrace the risk of feeling. I choose to embrace it, because life without feeling is nothing." Lyra's eyes widened, her glow pulsing faster, brighter, reflecting a storm of emotion she had never allowed herself to feel openly. She had studied humans for years, catalogued their strengths and weaknesses, and yet none of her calculations had prepared her for this. The courage of a single human standing in front of her, risking everything, speaking the truth of his heart. You are different," she said finally, her voice trembling slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Most of your kind. They hide behind strategy, behind survival, behind fear. You face it all with honesty. And it frightens me, yet it draws me in." Elias took a slow breath, letting her words sink in. "It is frightening because it is rare," he said gently. "Rare and precious. That is why it matters. That is why it can change things. And that is why I speak it even when it is dangerous. Because if we do not recognize the beauty of life, even in beings so different from us, then we lose everything that makes the galaxy worth living in." Lyra's glow softened to a gentle, steady rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. For the first time, she allowed herself to feel something she could not name. Trust, perhaps, or recognition, or even hope. She had spent centuries guided by logic, yet here, in the presence of this human, she began to understand something new, something powerful, something terrifying and wonderful all at once. And in that quiet, glowing chamber, amidst the whispers of council members and the cold walls of alien authority, a human and an alien understood one another, not through words of protocol, not through treaties or alliances, but through something far deeper, the recognition of life, the courage to feel, and the fragile, unstoppable power of connection. The council chamber, once a place of cold authority and rigid structure, seemed to breathe differently now. The air shimmered with unspoken tension, as if the galaxy itself were listening. Elias Hart's words, his courage, and his unwavering gaze had begun to change the atmosphere. The Zephyrians, creatures who measured everything in logic and efficiency, felt an unfamiliar warmth settle in their minds, a small, fragile flicker of something they could not quantify. Lyra floated closer to Elias, her glow pulsing softly, almost like a heartbeat. She had spent her life following protocol, obeying orders, hiding behind logic, and yet she felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Curiosity, awe, and a tentative hope. Elias had seen it. He could feel it in the subtle warmth of her glow, in the gentle tilt of her head, in the quiet attention she gave him. The human's words had done something no fleet, no weapon, no treaty could ever do. He had reminded them all that life, every life, was sacred. That beauty existed not in power or dominance, but in existence itself. That connection, courage, and honesty were more potent than any fleet of ships or army of warriors. A senior counselor, tall and jagged with crystalline limbs, shifted nervously. "This human," he murmured almost to himself. "He speaks as if his words hold more weight than law, more than reason." "Yes," another replied, voice low and uncertain. "Yet there is truth in them. A truth we cannot deny." Lyra's glow pulsed brighter as she listened. She had never allowed herself to question the Council's rules in this way. She had never dared to feel beyond calculation and duty. Yet now, facing Elias, she understood. The human's courage had unlocked something within her. A possibility she had never considered, that life, in all its fragile beauty, could be more than obedience. It could be joy, wonder, and hope. She looked at Elias, her silver violet eyes wide, full of questions she could not yet form. "Human, your words, they are dangerous, but I feel them. I feel their meaning." Elias's lips curved into a gentle smile. "That's all I ever hoped for," he said softly. "To be heard, to be understood, to remind someone, anyone, that they matter, that life matters." For the first time, Lyra allowed herself to move closer without hesitation. Her glow wrapped around her like a soft embrace, and Elias felt the warmth radiate not just in the room, but in his chest. It was as if the air itself had changed, charged with a new energy born of recognition, trust, and courage. The council members, too, were beginning to feel the shift. Some of them straightened, and their glowing patterns flickering as though uncertainty battled with the spark of understanding that Elias had planted. A quiet ripple of change spread across the chamber, small, fragile yet undeniable. "You see me?" Lyra whispered, voice trembling slightly. "Not as a tool, not as a diplomat, not as a representative of my empire, but as me?" "Yes," Elias replied, soft but unwavering. "I see you, just you. And that is why you are beautiful. Not for your glow, your rank, or your power, but because you exist, because life itself shines through you." The warmth in Lyra's glow spread further, almost like sunlight breaking through a storm. She had never felt such validation, such recognition, and yet it terrified her. What was this feeling? Trust? Connection? Something deeper, something she could not yet name. Elias noticed her hesitation and reached out slightly. Not in command, not in expectation, but in invitation. "It's okay to feel," he said quietly. "It's okay to see life and to see beauty and to hope. That is the strongest thing in the universe, stronger than any weapon, stronger than any fleet, stronger than any law." Lyra's bioluminescence shifted fully now, a warm, steady glow that reflected her surrender to something new, a recognition that life itself, its beauty, fragility, and emotion could not be ignored. She had opened herself to the possibility that the galaxy could be more than logic and control, that it could be alive, vibrant, and full of wonder. And in that moment, the human and the alien, standing together in the chamber, began a transformation not just of their own hearts but of the very air around them, a ripple that would extend beyond the council, beyond their species, beyond the stars. A reminder that life, connection, and courage were forces that even the coldest galaxy could not deny. The council chamber was quiet, yet it was alive in a way Elias' heart had never experienced. Every creature present felt the weight of his words and the warmth of his courage. The Zephyrians, masters of logic and precision, had begun to recognize something that could not be measured or calculated: truth, vulnerability, and the unyielding force of hope. Lyra hovered near him, her glow steady and radiant. She had listened to centuries of strategy, to orders and calculations that guided her empire. Yet Elias's words had reached a part of her that had never stirred before. She had felt something fragile yet undeniable. Connection, recognition, a spark of hope that perhaps even her cold, orderly world could be touched by life beyond rules. "You, human," she whispered, voice trembling slightly. "Your words, they change things. I feel it inside me." Elias gave a small, gentle nod. "That is all I hoped for. That anyone would see life as more than numbers, more than strategy, more than conquest. That someone would see the value of connection, the beauty and courage, the power of hope." A senior Zephyrian counselor, his crystalline limbs pulsing with light, broke the silence. "Perhaps there is merit in what he says, perhaps. Feeling is not weakness, but a strength we have ignored." Murmurs spread throughout the chamber. Aliens who had never questioned their rules now paused, uncertain. Humans were fragile, yes, but in Elias' heart they saw a different kind of strength, one that came from honesty, from bravery, from the courage to risk everything for truth. And now, they could not unsee it. Lyra's glow shifted again, warmer and steadier. I understand you, human. Not as a diplomat, not as a threat, but as you. I see you. I feel your words, and they matter." Elias smiled softly. "That is all anyone can ask for. That is all life asks for. To be seen, to be understood, to matter." The council remained still, but a change had begun. The rigid, calculated walls of diplomacy and authority had cracked. The Zephyrians, creatures who valued logic above all else, had glimpsed something that defied calculation. Humanity, raw and unafraid, speaking truth in a universe that often forgot the meaning of life. "You speak as if hope can survive in this galaxy," Lyra said quietly, almost to herself. "Yet we have only known strategy, survival, conquest. Can your hope truly endure?" Elias stepped closer, his voice calm and unwavering. "Hope survives because it is stronger than fear. Because it is born in the heart, not in fleets or weapons. Because even in darkness, even in chaos, it can shine. And when it shines, it changes everything it touches. That is why I speak. That is why I risk everything. That is why I see you, not as an alien diplomat, but as life itself." Lyra's glow spread fully, a luminous aura that seemed to fill the chamber. Her bioluminescent tendrils wrapped gently around her form, radiating warmth and light. She had never felt so alive, so connected, so seen. And for the first time she allowed herself to acknowledge it, not as a weakness, not as a distraction, but as truth. The silence that followed was no longer oppressive. It was filled with possibility, with understanding, with a recognition that Elias' heart's courage had achieved something extraordinary. He had reminded them that life, any life, is powerful, fragile, and beautiful. He had reminded them that seeing, valuing, and protecting it could shatter fear and awaken hope, even in the coldest hearts. Lyra's voice trembled as she spoke again. "Human, your words, they reach farther than fleets, further than laws. You have changed something here." Elias nodded, his eyes calm but full of emotion. "Then perhaps this is how we survive. Not with weapons, not with empires, but with connection, understanding, and the courage to see life for what it truly is. That is how the galaxy will remember us, not for power, but for courage and for hope." And in that chamber, with countless eyes upon them, the fragile, radiant truth of humanity, its courage, its honesty, its ability to see and value life, shattered the silence of the galaxy. For the first time, Even the Zephyrians understood that strength was not measured in conquest or control, but in recognition, in bravery, and in the fragile, unstoppable power of feeling. Years later, historians would record the event as the Hart-Lyra Accord, a milestone in galactic diplomacy. But those who had been present remembered it differently. They remembered the moment when a single human, standing before the most powerful council in the galaxy, dared to speak with honesty and courage. They remembered how his words had touched even the most logical, cold hearts, reminding all that life, any life, was beautiful, fragile, and worth valuing. Lyra, once a figure of calculated diplomacy and distant authority, remembered Elias Hart differently. She remembered the warmth in his eyes, the steady courage in his voice, and the way he had looked at her, not as an alien diplomat, not as a weapon of her empire, but as a living being deserving recognition, care, and respect. His words had not only shaken her understanding of herself, but had ignited a spark she had never allowed to exist before. Hope. The Zephyrian Council, initially rigid and unyielding, had been transformed by that moment. What Elias Hart had done was unprecedented. He had reminded them that connection, understanding, and the courage to see life were forces stronger than fleets, armies, or empires. A ripple of change spread across their society, subtle yet profound, touching policy, culture, and even the way they approached other species. Elias himself had returned to humanity, hailed not as a conqueror, nor as a diplomat who had brokered a simple treaty, but as a reminder of what humanity represented: courage in the face of uncertainty, honesty in the presence of fear, and the power of recognizing the value of life, however different or distant it might be. Humanity had once again proved that it was more than flesh and bone. It was spirit, hope, and resilience. Lyra and Elias would meet again many times, their bond growing stronger with each encounter. Their connection was not born of politics, convenience, or obligation, but of recognition and mutual respect. Each meeting reminded them, and those around them, that life, even in the cold expanse of the galaxy, could shine brightly when courage and honesty were present. And yet, the most lasting impact of that day was not the agreements, the accords, or the laws. It was the memory of a human who dared to speak truth to power. It was the reminder that beauty exists not in perfection, strength, or control, but in life itself, in its fragility, its courage, and its ability to connect across impossible divides. The galaxy, often silent and indifferent, had been reminded of this truth. Lyra's glow, now more fluid and radiant than ever, often reflected Elias's words. She had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, that courage could take the form of honesty, and that hope, fragile as it was, could shatter fear and awaken understanding even in the coldest hearts. And Elias, standing among humans and aliens alike, understood something profound: that humanity's greatest strength was not in its technology, not in its fleets nor in its conquest, but in its willingness to feel, to care, and to see life for what it truly was. In time, the story of that day spread across the stars. Humans, Zephyrians, and countless other species carried it with them, inspired by a single simple truth: that life, any life, is beautiful, and to see it, honor it, and risk everything for it is the highest act of courage. Elias Hart and Lyra became legends not because they wielded power, but because they reminded the galaxy of something it had long forgotten: the fragile, unstoppable, radiant power of connection, hope, and life. And in that enduring truth, humanity shone, not through domination or war, but through the courage to see, to feel, and to speak from the heart. The galaxy would never be the same.